So we've seen that vectors can represent either locations in space or directions. And we've seen that vectors have magnitudes and we can calculate those. We can also normalize vectors. Vectors are very useful pieces of information. And in Unreal Engine, as it's a three-dimensional engine, our vectors have three components, x, y, and z. Now, there exists another structure similar to the vector that is more designed to contain rotational information, and those we call rotators. To explain the rotator, let's first talk about an airplane. Now, I have an airplane drawn here, and the airplane has its own local directions. We see that its forward direction can be represented by the x-axis, its right direction can be represented by the y-axis, and its up direction can be represented by the z-axis. And we've seen that objects can have their own local coordinate spaces where the forward direction should always be x for any given actor in the world. Now let's say we'd like to rotate this object. When we rotate an object, it's useful to think about those rotations as rotations about the axes x, y, and z. Now I have my airplane drawn from three different directions. Our first diagram here is the top view. We're looking down onto the airplane from above. We're looking down the z-axis, which is why we can't see the z-axis from this view. We're just looking at the xy plane. Now if we were to rotate our plane clockwise in the xy plane, we're rotating our plane about the z-axis. We're twirling it or twisting it about the z-axis. When we twist about the z-axis, we're changing the yaw. We call this property yaw, the rotation about the z-axis. If I look at you and I shake my head no, I'm changing the yaw of my head because I'm twisting it about my own z-axis. That is the definition of the rotational quantity that we call yaw. Now let's look at our airplane from the side. We're now looking at the airplane from the y direction. We're looking down the y-axis, which is why we can't see the y-axis from this view. We're actually looking at the xz plane. Now our plane is pointed towards the x direction, that's its forward direction. Now let's imagine that we rotate our plane so that we're tipping the nose up into the air. We're rotating counterclockwise in the xz plane. This is changing the pitch of our plane. This rotational quantity called pitch is rotation about the y-axis. So what we're doing is we're taking our plane and we're rotating it about the y-axis. And this is changing our plane's pitch. If we tilt the plane up by 45 degrees, then we've just changed our pitch by 45 degrees. That's how pitch works. Now let's look at the front view. Now we can't see the x-axis because we're looking at the plane from the x direction. We're looking down the x-axis at the tip of the plane, and that's why we can't see the x-axis here. We're looking at the y-z plane. So in fact, we should see our wings here. Our wings are right here, visible in the YZ plane. Now, what happens if we twist our plane? Well, we're twisting our plane around the x-axis, and this is changing our roll. So the rotational quantity known as roll is a rotation about the x-axis, a rotation about the forward vector. So if I look at you and I'm twisting my head this way, like I don't quite understand what you're saying, I'm changing my head's roll. I'm rotating about my own forward vector, my own x-axis. And if I nod my head yes, I'm rotating about my own right vector, my y vector, right? So I'm changing my pitch. So yaw is like you're looking back and forth to cross the street. Roll is you're tilting your head like you don't quite understand. And pitch is looking up and down. So always think about our airplane when you're confused about yaw, pitch, and roll. Yaw rotates about the z, pitch rotates about the y, and roll rotates about the x. And if we package the yaw, pitch, and roll all together into one structure, we get the rotator. It's very similar to a vector. It has three quantities, three angular measurements: roll, pitch, and yaw. These are typically stored as degrees. So if we rotate 45 degrees up in the pitch, then our rotator will have 45 for its pitch. If we rotate 45 degrees in the roll, then our roll will be 45. And if we rotate 45 degrees in the yaw, then our yaw will be 45. So we can take the yaw, pitch, and roll for any object and represent its rotation in a three-dimensional coordinate system using the rotator. We'll be getting plenty of practice using rotators, so let's get started. I'll see you soon.